From Lagos, the nation's commercial capital, this is the News at 10. Live from Channels Television. Reporting tonight, Ijoma Unyato.
Hello and welcome. Nigeria Center for Disease Control announces new case management guidelines that allow patients without COVID-19 symptoms to be discharged after 14 days. Lagos State government relaxes ban on gatherings at worship centers, asks mosques and churches to resume on Friday, June the 19th and Sunday, June the 21st, respectively. House of Representatives rejects castration as punishment for rapists, calls for stiffer punishment for sex offenders. Senate launches investigation into federal government's interventions in the electricity sector since privatization of the sector. And U.S. state of Minnesota holds emotional memorial service for George Floyd, the African-American who died in police custody. Plus, we'll have business, sports, news from Abuja, the FCT, and later on news from our studios in London.
On business news tonight, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries projects world economy to shrink by 3.4% this year amid impact of COVID-19 on crude oil supply and demand.
On sports news tonight, the NBA's Board of Governors, approves a 22-team format for restarting the league season at the Disney campus near Orlando, Florida.
And from Abuja, Jigawa State government discharges 1,322 Almajire from a COVID-19 isolation center.
The Nigeria Center for Disease Control has announced new COVID-19 case management guidelines which allow asymptomatic patients to be discharged after 14 days. The new document also stops the use of some antiretroviral drugs which before now were used for the management of COVID-19 patients. The Director General of the NCDC, Dr. Chikwe Hekwazo, says the new guidelines are informed by recent scientific findings.
Since the outbreak of COVID-19 in Nigeria, the management of patients who are asymptomatic is perhaps one of the most difficult for the Nigeria Center for Disease Control. While such patients find it difficult to believe that they are carriers of the virus, health workers on their part do not know when it is safe to discharge such patients from the hospital. But a new case management by the NCDC may have laid this confusion to rest.
For symptomatic patients, they may now be discharged 10 days after symptom onset, at least 10 days after symptom onset, and at least 3 days without symptoms. If you're asymptomatic, we can discharge you. You can be discharged 14 days after your first PCR positive test. So we no longer have to wait for a negative test to discharge. You can be discharged 14 days after your first positive.
In his address, the chairman of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 highlights what it means for states to take more responsibility and to stop the spread of the virus in the second phase of the ease of lockdown.
I have said it often and often, and I will repeat it again. Health is on the concurrent legislative list. All the 3 tiers of government on a monthly basis from the Federation account, from the FAP meeting, collect the distributables and they ought to apply it to the entire segment over which they superintend. Secondary health system is the responsibility of the state. University teaching hospitals, federal medical centers are tertiary institutions, and specialized hospitals that you have all over the country that are established by the federal government. So it's a shared responsibility. We will not hesitate to review as we progress, should the situation warrant, to avoid preventable risk of transmission.
The Minister of Health advised against the use of rapid test kits for COVID-19.
To comment on the various test kits that are thought to be in use in Nigeria, especially the antibody-based test kits, I would like to advise that only 4 of those kits have been evaluated by the Medical Laboratory Science Council of Nigeria, and all 4 of them failed the validation test. NCDC certified laboratory in Nigeria is still the WHO-recognized PCR testing method, which gives us reliable results.
Nigeria currently has well over 11,000 confirmed cases of COVID-19, just as many anticipate a further surge in cases, as states across the country continue to relax some of the restrictions imposed to check the spread of the virus.
And hope is rekindled with the resumption of the trials of hydroxychloroquine by the World Health Organization. The WHO representative in Nigeria, Dr. Fiona Braka, says its Data Safety Monitoring Board decided that there was no reason to discontinue the trials and recommended resumption of all arms of Solidarity trials.
The suspension was taken as a precautionary measure pending review of all the safety data by the Solidarity Trial Data Safety Monitoring Committee. This suspension lasted about 8 days. Yesterday, the Data Safety Monitoring Committee met, and based on a review of the available mortality data regarding the use of hydroxychloroquine for treatment of COVID-19 patients, and also considering information from a large trial ongoing in the UK, the recovery trial, where the Data Safety Monitoring Committee of that trial also reviewed their data. The members of the committee agreed that there was no cogent reason as to recommend the modifications of the protocol, and they advised that the trial should be continued as planned. The executive group of the study therefore decided, based on the advice of the safety committee, to resume the inclusion of patients in the hydroxychloroquine study arm of the trial. Just to remind the public, WHO continues to emphasize there is still no evidence that hydroxychloroquine or any other drug is effective in treating or preventing COVID-19.
And it's positive news as 24 more COVID-19 patients have been discharged from various isolation centers in Lagos. The patients, 4 from Onikon, 1 from Bagada, 1 from Agidingbe, and 18 from Luth isolation centers have fully recovered and tested negative for COVID-19. This brings the total number of confirmed cases that have been successfully managed and discharged in Lagos to 952. Meanwhile, days after the federal government lifted the ban on religious gatherings, the Lagos State Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu today said religious organizations can now reopen their venues, but with a crowd capacity of not more than 40%.
On Monday, June the 1st, the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 made a pronouncement on the reopening of churches and mosques, but with conditions.
For churches, each service should be for a maximum of an hour, with an interval of 30 minutes in between services to allow time for disinfection. Mosques may open 15 minutes before Adhan and close 10 minutes after prayer for Fajr, Zuhur, and Asr.
The Lagos State Governor, Mr. Babajide Sanwo-Olu, is taking it up from there, announcing more guidelines if religious services must hold.
Precisely from the 19th of June for our Muslim worshippers, and from the 21st of June for our Christian worshippers, we will be allowing all of our religious bodies to open at a maximum of 40% of their capacity. We will also be advising that there should only be mandatory Fridays and Sunday services. Persons below the age of 15, because of how well they walk around and how they become difficult to hold down, that they should be excused from the places of worship. And citizens that are above the age of 65, citizens that are above the age of 65 should not be allowed into these places of worship.
And for primary and secondary schools, a decision on resumption is yet to be made by the state government.
We will be engaging with the Ministry of Education, with the Lagos State Safety Commission, and we'll be coming out with a specific pronouncement. In 2 weeks' time, we'll be able to make a full pronouncement, once the protocols have been agreed with all of the various stakeholders at the primary and secondary school, as into when and how these institutions of learning, these schools, will be opening.
Governor Sanwo-Olu rounded off his briefing saying that all events and social centers should re-register to reopen at lasgsafetyreg.com and appeals to residents to stay safe and adhere to all COVID-19 guidelines in order to reduce the spread of the virus.
Meanwhile, Governor Nasir El-Rufai of Kaduna State has met with traditional rulers in the state to discuss and map out modalities ahead of the reopening of business activities in the state. He calls for collaboration and support of all stakeholders as the state government intensifies efforts to contain the spread of the virus. Under the quarantine order in Kaduna State, markets, schools, places of worship and other socio-economic activities were shut down indefinitely.
Security officials on the road enforcing restriction order at the state borders and major streets. Locked stalls indicative of a stop of economic activities and almost empty streets are now the new normal in Kaduna State. It's about 2 months since the government imposed the lockdown across the state in order to curb the spread of the coronavirus. This meeting, at the instance of Governor Nasir El-Rufai with traditional rulers, is to discuss how to ease the lockdown and reopen the state. The governor is consulting at all levels to fine-tune the processes in order to balance the preservation of life and the pursuit of livelihood.
We have presented our draft plan for the opening up of Kaduna for their inputs and suggestions, and we've got some excellent suggestions from them, recommendations that will incorporate. In parallel with this, there are ongoing consultations with the religious leaders at the State House. We are also meeting with National Union of Road Transport Workers to look at how to get public transportation back and under what conditions. There are other meetings with the business community to see which businesses would be allowed to operate and on what terms, what protocols, health protocols, hygienic protocols, as well as physical distancing protocols that we need to put in place to ensure that the reopening does not lead to a spike in infections, because at the heart of all our policies is the need to protect the lives of the people of Kaduna State.
The Emir of Birnin Gwari believes this meeting is an essential one.
We really appreciated what the government has been doing, and the plans they have to ease some of the problems people are facing were discussed. I know government is concerned and they're trying to make things life easier for people.
The government says similar consultative meetings are being held with religious and business leaders, as well as other stakeholders, to have a clearer picture of the potential challenges of the easing of the lockdown and how best to deal with them.
And while the dialogue towards opening up the state continues in Kaduna, the Kwara State government says worship centers may reopen from tomorrow on the condition that they satisfy certain criteria already agreed. The government, however, warned that the concession does not mean the state has flattened the curve.
We're definitely not out of the woods as cases continue to rise, especially because of the violation of travel restrictions. It is preferred that worship centers should remain shut until it is clear that the curve of transmission has been flattened. However, In line with the presidential advisory and the position of the religious umbrella bodies in Kwara State, worship centers in Kwara State may reopen from June 5th, Friday, provided they satisfy the following conditions. Worship centers shall be organized by the respective head of the congregation in such a way that one attendant is at least 1 meter away from the next.
In part two, after the break, National Association of Nigerian Students demand death sentence for rapists following rising cases of sexual abuse. That's in a moment. Do join us again. Welcome back. If you've just joined us, you're watching the news at 10 on Channels Television, coming to you live from Lagos. A reminder of our top stories. Nigeria's Center for Disease Control announces new case management guidelines that allow patients without COVID-19 symptoms to be discharged after 14 days. Lagos State Government relaxes ban on gatherings at worship centers, mosques and churches to resume Friday, June the 19th and Sunday, June the 21st, respectively. House of Representatives rejects castration as punishment for rapists, calls for stiffer punishment for sex offenders. Senate launches investigation into federal government's interventions in the electricity sector since privatization of the sector. And U.S. state of Minnesota holds emotional memorial service for George Floyd, the African-American who died in police custody. Our website, channelstv.com, has more information on our top stories and others. Subscribe and watch Channels Television's live stream on YouTube and other social media platforms using your mobile device browser, or you can download the Channels TV app for Android and iOS devices from their respective stores. You can also watch us via your smart TV platforms on Apple TV, Android, Fire TV, and Roku as well. The Obaro of Kaba, His Royal Highness Solomon Owuniyi, has appealed to the Kogi state government to relax the lockdown imposed on the area due to the suffering of the people. The royal father made the appeal at his palace in Kaba while speaking to Channels Television. He said that farming, which is the source of livelihood of his people, has been destroyed by herdsmen as people were locked down at home.
The average laborer here may not get up to 2,000 a day. So you can imagine the level of poverty that we are in. You can imagine the sufferings of people not going out, people not going to their farms, people not going to the markets. And we are not happy, I must confess. And within the last 24 hours, reports reaching me here indicate that our farmlands have been invaded by these nomadic herders. You know, it has been a game of hide and seek between the farmers and the herdsmen over some years now. That is well known to everybody. But so they have now discovered that for the next 14 days or 13 days thereabout, nobody will come to the farm. So they are free, which means the ground for hunger is being prepared now. And that is why we are appealing to His Excellency, the Governor of Kogi State, to do a rethink about this lockdown.
132 Almajirai repatriated from different states in the north to Jigawa State have been discharged from isolation. The Jigawa State Governor Badaru Abubakar told journalists in Dutse, the state capital, that the remaining 23 are part of the 122 that tested positive for COVID-19 but are yet to recover. According to him, the state government plans to enroll them in conventional schools in their various communities.
Jigawa in Nigeria's northwest has been dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, especially as it concerns the plight of the Almajirai. Not long ago, Over 1,000 were repatriated from several northern states, and this prompted the state government to move the infected patients to its isolation center for treatment. The state governor, Mohammed Abubakar, in Dutse, the state capital, says 1,322 out of 1,345 Almajirai have now been discharged from isolation.
As I mentioned in my previous speech last week, 1,345 Almajirais were repatriated from various states to Jigawa State. We took good care of them and provided them with their social welfare and health needs. All those Almajirais have been handed over back to their parents, apart from 23 that have active COVID-19 diseases and currently receiving treatment in one of our isolation centers.
Governor Abubakar also says the Almajirai will be enrolled in conventional schools in their various communities.
We have directed the enrollment of those discharged into primary schools to commence Western as well as continue their Quranic education.
Northern governors recently agreed to ban the Almajiri system to help curb the spread of COVID-19. And Jigawa received several Almajirai from Gombe, Nasarawa, Kaduna, including Kano, which had over 600 sent about a month ago, and some of them tested positive for COVID-19. Those who tested negative were sent back to their families, while each received 10,000 naira and other palliatives. The state government says it will do well to cater to the needs of the Almajirai and ensure they stay safe from the COVID-19 pandemic.
Meanwhile, the 19 coronavirus patients admitted at the Damaturu Specialist Hospital Isolation Center, Yobe, have been discharged. The COVID-19 committee in the state is yet to address journalists, but a reliable source from the isolation center told Channels Television that the center had been empty for the past 3 days. And over in Gombe State, the state government house has been closed while public officials, including cabinet members and staff, are being tested for coronavirus following confirmation that the test result of staff who died recently returned positive. Already, Governor Inua Yahaya has been directed that high-risk areas such as the offices of the late official and that of the SSG, as well as the government house clinic where he was admitted, be disinfected and closed from any physical interaction until Monday, June the 8th, 2020. The Delta State Ministry of Health says it's not pleased that a 53-year-old health official who is said to have contracted COVID-19 has been forcefully moved from one of the isolation centers in Asaba by some members of his family. The health official, identified as Nwachuku Michael Modi, had tested positive for COVID-19 on May the 23rd, 2020, and was admitted into one of the designated treatment centers in Asaba on May the 24th. The Commissioner for Health is warning that the abductors now constitute a grave danger to themselves and others. He said efforts were on to find the patient and return him to the center to continue his treatment. Power supply in Nigeria continues to draw attention in various quarters as the Senate Committee on Power wants to know why the many interventions in the sector have not yielded the desired results, even after the privatization exercise. The investigation is intended to ascertain the efficiency of the interventions and why the electricity situation in the country has remained under par. The chairman of the committee, Senator Gabriel Suswam, told journalists that the panel will also investigate all market participants in the power value chain and ascertain the level of corporate governance compliance.
Just wait for us. The Committee on Power was mandated based on that motion to investigate comprehensively the power sector, especially in areas as it relates to the interventions. You know that the federal government have over the years intervened at various times in different sums. There was 701 billion, there was 600 billion, This year there has been 380 billion. There was also 213 billion. The investigation is intended to identify why these interventions have come and there has been no improvement, so that at the end of the day, the leadership of the Senate will present that to the President of this country, who has shown a lot of commitment in providing electricity to Nigerians. Unfortunately, he has not achieved that because of whether, the money is not adequate or the money has actually been deployed for the purpose for which he had meant it to be deployed to.
The President Buhari administration continues to give account of its 5 years in office. The Minister of Works and Housing, Mr. Babatunde Fashola, who was a guest on our program Politics Today, highlighted some of the major projects carried out in the last 5 years. According to him, the ministry has embarked on radical infrastructure development across the Federation, and some of the projects include the second Niger Bridge, the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, and the Abuja-Kaduna to Kano Highway.
With much less resources, we have committed to a more radical infrastructure development across Nigeria. So as I speak to you now, we're executing 600 road projects across all the states in the Federal Republic of Nigeria. We're universities repairing internal roads, reconstructing internal roads of federal universities that have been left behind. That is what we inherited, and we're not complaining about it. We're dealing as best with it as our resources permit. So this is where we are. On terms of all those super highways you mentioned, it is no longer news. The Abuja-Kaduna Highway is under construction. So is the Bodo-Boni Bridge, which was conceived in 1977, awarded 3 times unsuccessfully. Construction is going on there as I speak to you. So the second Niger Bridge and the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway that was constructed by sloganeering. Now work is going on there. The Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, the second Niger Bridge, the Abuja-Kaduna-Kano Highway are part of the project funded under the Presidential Infrastructure Development Fund. And the expected delivery dates are Q1 of 2022.
The Vice President, Professor Yemi Osinbajo, has held a meeting of the Economic Sustainability Committee with the leadership of the National Assembly. The virtual meeting, anchored from the presidential villa, was attended by the Senate President, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and several other principal officers of the National Assembly. Professor Osinbajo said the ESC called the meeting to consult with the National Assembly before the committee's report is submitted to the President. Praising members of the National Assembly, the Vice President noted that the President had always commended the good working relationship between the executive arm of the federal government and the current National Assembly. The leadership of the National Assembly welcomed the plan and commended the President and the Vice President for calling the meeting. When the news at 10 returns, OPEC projects world economy to shrink by 3.4% in 2020 amid impact of COVID-19 on crude oil supply and demand. That's on business. Do join us again. Welcome back to the news at 10. Let's cross over to Abuja now. Here's Linda Akigbe. Linda?
Hello, Ijoma. Commence investigations into the cases of Uwa Omozuwa, Tina Ezekwe, the reported rape of a minor in Jigawa State, as well as all other reported cases of violence against women. Now, that's the message of the House of Representatives to the Inspector General of Police in response to a motion of urgent public importance by Rotimi Agunsoye on the need to condemn the rising cases of sexual violence and other social vices against women and police brutality.
The House of Representatives debates the rape and killing of 22-year-old Uwaila Omozuwa, 48 hours after the Senate's reaction to the same issue. The 22-year-old was gruesomely raped and murdered in a church in Benin City, Edo State, where she had gone to study.
The House is concerned that a better government policy and legislative framework is required to stem the rising violence against women, as well as improve and support for women development.
They raped a girl, killed that lady, and when they went to report to police, they were asking them to give them mobilization money, for God's sake.
Every day you hear people talk to girls, protect yourselves, stay in your lane, but nobody talks to the boy child. Nobody tells the boy child, you need to respect the women. You need to respect the girls around you.
Gender-based violence is on the rise in Nigeria in recent times. In April, 18-year-old Jennifer was attacked and raped by a gang of 5 men in Kaduna State. In May, an 18-year-old female student, Barakat, was also raped and killed in Ibadan. These are just some of the cases that make it to the open.
We can sit down here and legislate on this topic. If the state legislators don't adopt what we pass here, this issue will continue to foster.
Mr. Speaker, my amendment is that all men engaged in raping minors should be castrated and jailed.
What's interesting about this is that in the rare event that a woman rapes a minor, what do you do to the woman? Those in favor of the amendment, please say aye. Those against, please say nay. The nays have it.
Deported who lost their lives.
The House observes a minute of silence in honor of women who have recently been victims of gender-based violence and resolves that members should dress in black at the next sitting of the House in solidarity with women. Terry Ikumi, Channels Television News.
Meanwhile, the dust around the death of Uwa Omozuwa is yet to settle as the National Association of Nigerian Students, NANS, is calling for a death sentence to be pronounced for sex offenders. The president of a students' body, Daniel Senakwan, made the call during a protest march through some major streets in Benin City, the Edo State capital. The legislator representing Ovia Federal Constituency, Dennis Idahosa, who joined the students in the Solidarity March, is planning to move a motion to support this request on the floor of the House.
The main gate of the University of Benin, Ubowo campus, is the master point for these students, many of whom are dressed in black, getting set for a peaceful protest. Security operatives are on the ground to ensure the protest is not hijacked for other motives as the group begins their movement through major streets. The solidarity songs, messages on the placards tell their story. The march is dedicated to a colleague, Miss Uwaila Omozuwa, who was raped and killed by unknown persons in a church.
Including the legislature.
The leadership of the National Association of Nigerian Students makes demands: justice for late Omozuwa, as well as capital punishment for sex offenders.
We are here to say no to rape. We are here to say no to sexual violence. And this is going to be reoccurring enough to the global community that Nigerian students have resolved collectively, unanimously, that the punishment for rape should be death.
The member representing Ovia Federal Constituency, Dennis Idahosa, says he's also in support of death penalty sentence and would follow it up at the National Assembly.
We are here to support the Nigerian student in ensuring that these perpetrators are brought to book. And going forward, by the grace of God, we're going to sponsor a bill that will ensure maximum penalty for sex offenders.
The gruesome murder of Miss Uwaila Omozuwa, a 100-level microbiology student of the University of Benin, remains fresh in the minds of many. For these students, justice would be served when sex offenders pay the ultimate price for their crimes.
At least 8 policemen and 1 civilian have been reported killed by a gang of armed robbers that attacked Isonlu community in Yagba East local government area of Kogi State. The armed robbers reportedly laid siege to the community where they first attacked a police station, killing 7 police officers, including their DPO and 2 female officers on duty. Channels Television gathered that the armed robbers thereafter attacked a commercial bank where they killed a civilian and another police officer. An eyewitness says the robbers came in 2 vehicles while the robbery operation lasted for almost 1 hour, after which they escaped from the town. Meanwhile, the state governor, Yaya Bello, has asked security officers to go after the robbers. And a sad occurrence has also been reported in Zamfara State, where suspected bandits have killed 21 persons during attacks in some villages in Maru and Talata Mafara local government areas of Zamfara State. The spokesman of the State Police Command, Mohammed Shehu, who confirmed the incident to Channels Television, says the bandits invaded Tungu Malan, Mayan Karaje, Tungur Ane and Boleke villages, all in Maru local government area, with intention to rustle cows. Mr. Shehu explains that when confronted by members of the militia group known as Yansake, the bandits started shooting sporadically, resulting in the death of 21 persons, with 12 others injured. He added that the victims were attacked and killed while coming back from a funeral prayer. And staying with security stories, the Nigerian military says it remains resolved to continue the offensive against terrorists, mainly through the land and air components of Operation Lafia Dole. The coordinator of the Defense Media Operations, Major General John Inenche, told a news conference in Abuja that intensified military operations have resulted in the death of 392 bandits. He reiterated his call to members of the public to be proactive in providing timely reports and suspicious movements and strangers within their locality to troops stationed in their areas. And that's all from Abuja. Back to you, Joma.
Thanks a lot, Linda. The former governor of Zamfara State, Abdulaziz Yari, is weighing in on the political crisis in Edo State, calling on both the national chairman of the All Progressives Congress, Adams Oshomole, and the state governor, Godwin Obaseki, to put the interests of the party above personal interest. He spoke to State House correspondents after a private meeting with the vice president at the presidential villa in Abuja.
I think the entire life is about tolerance. So we have to tolerate one another. And no matter what interests we have, we should put the interests of our party in our hearts. And also, we should look at the interests of the party as a superior than any other interest. So I think it is very, very important. The lay-down procedure is there. The rules are there. The Constitution are there. Let us respect the Constitution and lay down procedure of a party, and let us respect one another, because issue of party is not about me, it's not about the chairman, it's not about the president, it's collective responsibility. So therefore, I think it's very, very important, both the governor and the chairman, to fine-tune how they are going to work for the safety of this party and for the purpose to win election in Edo State.
Let's take a look at some business news now. Here's Anne Waudu.
Thank you, Ijoma. Welcome to Business News. The Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries says it expects the global economy to shrink by 3.4% this year due to the impact of the novel coronavirus. This was made known today by the OPEC Secretary General, Mr. Mohamed Barkindo, via teleconference at the 7th edition of the technical meeting of OPEC and non-OPEC countries participating in the Declaration of Cooperation. Pointing to the May edition of OPEC's economic report, Mr. Barkindo says he expects world oil demand growth this year to drop by a staggering 9.07 million barrels per day to around 90.59 million barrels per day. And that's a level last seen before the 2014 and the 2016 market downturn, with the worst impact expected within this quarter. Meanwhile, the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation says it is expanding a bouquet of its business portfolios to the power and other critical sectors of the economy as part of measures to sustain its profitability and cope with the volatility within the global crude oil market. In a statement released today, NNPC spokesman Mr. Kenny Obateru explains that the national oil company seeks to achieve a $10 per barrel cost by the fourth quarter of 2021. According to him, NNPC will be partnering with private developers to reduce the housing deficit in Nigeria, while the Ajaokuta-Kaduna-Kano pipeline network will enable it deepening its footprint in the power sector through the establishment of an independent power plant. The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, has disbursed $10 billion to 27 countries in sub-Saharan Africa to enable them tackle with the impact of COVID-19. IMF spokesman Mr. Jerry Rice, who made this known at the press briefing in Washington, D.C., says the multilateral organization's disbursement in the last 2 months is about 10 times the annual average for the region before the crisis. He expressed optimism that the IMF will provide more assistance to the continent in the coming weeks, as between 34 to 40 African nations have already made requests for financial assistance to enable them respond to the pandemic. Now let's take a look at the stock market today. About 50 billion naira has been lost as investors are taking advantage of gains recorded in the last sessions this week. Let's join Chimezie Obiwagu for the details.
Thank you and welcome to the Stock Market Report. The game changed today. The bears finally reared their head and twisting the bulls to get hold of the market. Profit taken on MTN Nigeria, GT Bank, Zenith and UBA was the reason for this negative close today. Even the 1% gain by highly capitalized Dangote Cement could not save the market. Look at the banking stock. Heavily beaten, 2.12% down, and that pulled the index into the red by 0.38%. The top trades for today were majorly the banking stocks. FBNH remains the highest contributor to the volume of shares, but the price of that stock was unchanged. Others are Zenith Bank, FCMB, and of course, GT Bank. Interestingly, we saw more of sellers than buyers. But then, activities weren't as much as yesterday. In 4,550 deals, a little over 270 million shares were traded, and 5.2 billion naira was realized. We still have one more trading day for the week. And like I keep saying, the market is really unpredictable, but the optimism remains strong as the economies gradually open up. And that was the Stock Market Report. I'm Chimezie Obiwagu.
Thank you, Chimezie. The bears also had the upper hand on major global stock markets around the world today. Investors are still reacting to European Central Bank expansion of its COVID-19 bond buying program to 1.3 trillion euros, as well as disappointing job data from the United States. Let's check out the closing figures for today. And with those mixed numbers, we end Business News tonight. Thank you for watching. I'm Anne Nwawadu. The rest of 10 continues now with Ijoma.
Thanks a lot, Anne. Still ahead on the news at 10, U.S. state of Minnesota holds emotional memorial service for George Floyd. We have more international news from our London studios and around the world in 5. Please stay with us. And there you have the U.S. state of Minneapolis holding an emotional memorial service for George Floyd, the African-American man whose death in police custody set off a wave of protests and arrests in America in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic and a divisive presidential election campaign. Attended by Floyd's family members and some politicians, the memorial is the first of many planned over the next few days before a funeral on Tuesday with a private service at an undisclosed location. Here's Simon Pusey with more international news in Around the World in 5.
Good evening and welcome to the Channel studios here in London for your international news around the world in 5. The ex-US Defense Secretary James Mattis has denounced President Donald Trump, saying he deliberately stokes division. It's after protests continued for the 9th night in anger over the death of unarmed black man George Floyd at the hands of police in Minneapolis. Large crowds of protesters continued to gather late into the night in Portland, with some incidents of vehicles being set on fire. In Brooklyn, New York, the police charged into a crowd defying the local curfew. This happens as prosecutors in Minneapolis filed a murder charge against one officer already in custody for the killing of Mr. Floyd, and 3 more have been accused of playing a role in his death. The Brazilian president has once again criticised the lockdown measures in his country to halt the spread of coronavirus, while his government announced a record-high number of deaths. Jair Bolsonaro has once again played down the virus, warning that the economic fallout from quarantine measures will be worse than the virus itself. Meanwhile, the pandemic does not show any sign of slowing down in Brazil, with almost 30,000 new cases and more than 1,200 deaths recorded in just one day. There are now 555,383 total confirmed cases in Brazil and 31,199 deaths. There have also been protests over lockdown measures in Senegal, with demonstrations in the capital Dakar over a nationwide curfew. Protesters set tyres on fire and threw stones at security forces after a 3-month-long dusk-to-dawn curfew. The unrest in Senegal's capital followed similar action in the holy city of Touba a night earlier. The UN has warned the political and security gains made by Somalia in recent years could be at risk if quick action is not taken by the international community to help avert a major humanitarian crisis. The effect of devastating floods, desert locusts and the impact of COVID-19 is threatening development in the country. That's according to the Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Close to 500,000 people have been displaced by recent floods in Somalia's central regions, while a severe locust infection threatens food security and nutrition for many. Tens of thousands of people in the Philippines may have been killed in the war on drugs since mid-2016 amid near total impunity for police and top officials. That's according to a new report of the United Nations. The crackdown on drugs, launched by President Rodrigo Duterte after winning an election on a platform of crushing crime. Since he took office, police would systematically force suspects to make self-incriminating statements or risk facing lethal force. Lawyers and activists raised the alarm this week over a new anti-terrorism bill published by President Duterte, warning of draconian and arbitrary provisions that could be used to target his detractors. German public prosecutors have announced they are investigating a 43-year-old German man on suspicion of the murder of Madeleine McCann, the British girl who disappeared in Portugal in 2007. State prosecutor Hans Christian Walters said the prosecutors believe the girl may be dead. McCann disappeared from her bedroom on May the 3rd in 2007 during a family vacation in the Algarve while her parents were dining with friends nearby in the resort of Praia de Luz. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has declared a state of emergency after 20,000 tons of diesel oil leaked into a river within the Arctic Circle. The spill happened when a fuel tank at a power plant near the Siberian city of Norilsk collapsed last Friday. President Putin expressed anger after discovering officials only learnt about the incident 2 days later. In a televised video conference, Mr. Putin attacked the head of the company over its response. The spill has contaminated a 350 square kilometre area so far. The incident has prompted stark warnings from environmental groups. In the South Korean capital Seoul, bars and restaurants have turned to robots to meet the new customer awareness towards hygiene and contactless services. A recent second wave outbreak originating from nightclubs in Seoul has forced many establishments to shut their doors for good, and robots seem a good solution to cut out personnel costs and assure a high hygiene standard. And finally, Australia's Prime Minister's press conference to announce a 4th stimulus package briefly turned comical when he and reporters were told by a local to get off his grass.
10,000 Australians. Sure, let's just move back from there.
Scott Morrison travelled to a construction site in Gugong to make a series of announcements when he was interrupted.
Hey guys, I've just reseeded that.
The Prime Minister quickly obliged, giving the man a thumbs up and an all good. And that's your international news around the world in 5. Now back to the Channel studios in Lagos.
Time now for some sports news. The NBA's Board of Governors has approved the 22-team format for restarting the league season in late July at the Disney campus near Orlando, Florida by a 29-1 vote. Under the plan, 13 Western Conference teams and 9 Eastern Conference teams would play 8 regular season games, as well as a possible play-in tournament for the 8th seed. An investigation by Richard McLaren into the International Weightlifting Federation has found doping cover-ups and millions of dollars in missing money. McLaren said 40 positive doping tests were hidden in IWF records and that athletes whose cases were delayed or covered up went on to win medals at the World Championships and other events. English Premier League clubs will be able to make 5 substitutions per match for the remainder of this season when it resumes on June the 17th. The temporary law amendment was approved by the International Football Association Board last month to protect player welfare on football's resumption in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. And that's sports news.
Thanks a lot, Ayotunde. And the main news again. The Nigeria Center for Disease Control today announced new case management guidelines that will allow patients without COVID-19 symptoms to be discharged after 14 days. And that's the news at 10 tonight. Thank you so much for staying with us. I'm Ijoma Onyato. Good night.